Hi Braxton, my name is Tal and this is Due Diligence. I've been following your work and specifically the 10 Questions to Atheists series, and today I watched your response to the answers to question 4, and I want to say a few small things about it. Firstly, there are a few points that I very much agree with actually.
If someone doesn't believe that God exists at all, then we need to really start with strong arguments to believe that some God exists in general. Many atheists will say it's not right for Christians to talk about some God, the God of the philosophers, just general theism like that. They need to talk about the Christian God because that's their God. But there's actually a way of organizing the discussion. I don't have much of a chance of getting you to believe that the Christian God exists if I don't first show you that there's good reason to believe that some God exists. If I can't get you there, then I'm gonna have a much more difficult case when we get to specific reasons to believe that, say, the resurrection of Jesus happened as a real event in history. Because the probability that God was that Jesus was raised by God from the dead is a whole lot higher if you believe there's a God who had the power to raise Jesus from the dead.
Like you, I don't love it when atheists say that. I fully agree that it could make sense to first prove that there is a God and to only then find out which one it is. When atheists say things like, even if the Kalam were true, the theists have all their work ahead of them, I always think, no, they only have some of their work still ahead of them. Another point of agreement is that saying that we just aren't convinced is not the best way to represent our views on the God question. It's often necessary, though, to cover all the bases. With that said, I think you might be missing the point about why many atheists started giving this answer, and this point actually seems to have a lot to do with what seems to be your motivation behind asking this question. There's more than a handful of reasons for why atheists give this answer. Some actually don't have a concrete opinion. Others do it because too often, if we take a position on the God question, our interlocutor will equivocate and make it sound as though we're saying something that we never actually said. But it seems to me that a main reason why many atheists started saying that they just aren't convinced or that they lack belief is because when we say that our position is that there is no God, our interlocutor thinks that that implies we have a burden of proof, just like you keep doing.
Whichever pole you take a position at, you bear a burden of proof.
We simply don't feel like this burden of proof is ours to bear. I know this may seem to you like some admission of guilt, like I'm saying that you're right about it being disingenuous or something, but it really isn't. And the reason is that this burden of proof really isn't ours to bear. Whether we're Gnostic or agnostic about our belief, the burden of proof always lies with the one trying to disprove the default position. And the default position must always be doesn't exist. There is a reason why most people say that they don't believe in fairies, when they actually mean that they believe that fairies don't exist, right? That's the default position, and unless you believe that the default position is wrong, you accept it. So if you just don't believe that fairies do exist, you accept that they don't. Same with God. One way to show this actually comes from the very fact of the effectiveness of this lack of belief stance. Whether we're at 0 or at negative 100 on Cameron's scale, we live our lives as though there is no God. And you evidently accept that because you won't settle with people being at 0, right? It's not enough for you that they don't think God doesn't exist. You want them to believe that God does exist. For another way to show it, I'll use Noel's example. In my response to your questions, I used the example of three-legged people who live under tectonic plate boundaries. And in my answer to your challenge with Cameron, I used the example of subterranean deep-sea koalas. But since you like Noel Plum's goblin slugs, let's go with that. It's true that we both lacked belief and disbelief in goblin slugs until Noel brought them up. And that now that he has, all three of us probably believe that they don't exist. We are all a goblin sluggists. But let's say in terms of Cameron scale, where would you put yourself? If P where goblin slugs exist, would you put yourself at 10? Maybe smack down in the middle at 0? Negative 10? Negative 100? Where? And does that question even make any sense? Let's imagine that you found yourself in a debate with a goblin sluggist. If they say that your disbelief in goblin slugs means that you have a burden of proof, would that seem reasonable to you? How would you react if someone told you that you either have to be completely opinionless on the whole issue of goblin slugs, or you had to be willing to accept the burden of proof? Putting the burden of proof on the goblin sluggist side means that there's no limit to the burdens of proof that can be piled up on us. Anyone can assert anything with no basis whatsoever, and it's up to the rest of us to prove them wrong. Let me promise you this, if debaters on your side of the fence just accepted that they are the only ones who have a burden of proof, those on my side would be far more willing to plainly say that their position is that there are no goblin slugs, gods. And that brings me to one more point of agreement, actually.
Even if you're a lacktheist about God in general, you still bear some burden of proof to explain why you're not convinced by the reasons given for that God.
I actually said something similar in my response to the hunter's dilemma. If you believe that a certain piece of evidence is convincing and I want to claim that it isn't, it's up to me to convince you of that, and vice versa, because unfortunately, in matters like this, I just don't see how we can have a default position. So hopefully, we can all be open enough to listen. And the same is true regarding what the default position should be. If you don't think that the default has to be that goblin slugs don't exist, and that it's always up to the side claiming existence to prove that they do, this is yet another thing I will need to convince you of. And if we can't reach any type of agreement on this, then a follow-up debate where each of us puts the burden of proof on the other might be a waste of time and energy. I actually do accept the burden of proof regarding two assertions: that there is no good reason to accept that God exists, and that until such reason is found, we must tentatively accept that God doesn't exist. That's it for this short one. Thank you very much for watching, and remember, just because our world is complex, it doesn't have to be complicated. Have a good one.